For 38 years, Judge Constance Mercer had sat behind a bench in the Ontario Superior Court, and never once let anyone see her cry. People in the legal community called her the Stone Bench. Not to her face, of course. But she knew. You always know what people say when they think you cannot hear them, and she had decided long ago that it was a compliment. In the courtroom, emotion was a liability, grief was a distraction. Compassion, poorly managed, was the enemy of justice. So she had folded every soft thing inside herself into a very small box and placed it somewhere unreachable, and she had kept it there for a very long time. She was brilliant at her job. Everyone agreed on that. At 41, she was one of the youngest Superior Court judges in Ontario's history. She had grown up in Sudbury, the daughter of a schoolteacher, and a man who worked at the nickel smelter until his lungs gave out. She had put herself through law school on scholarships and sheer stubbornness, clerked in Toronto, and climbed every rung of the legal ladder, with the kind of focused intensity that left no room for anything else. No marriage. No time for friendships that required maintenance. A small condo on King Street West with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city, where she sat most evenings with case files and a cup of tea that always went cold before she remembered to drink it. There was, however, one exception to her solitude. Her daughter, Zoe. Zoe was 7 years old and had been placed with Constance through a private adoption when she was 4 days old. The mother had been a young woman from Constance's hometown, and the circumstances were complicated in the way that those circumstances always are. Full of quiet desperation and hard choices, and people doing the best they could with what they had been given. Constance had not planned on becoming a mother, but when the call came, when the social worker had described this infant girl born 3 weeks early and already fighting for space in a world that did not seem prepared for her, Constance had said yes before she fully understood what she was agreeing to. She did not regret it, not for a single moment, but she would be the first to admit that she was not a natural mother in the warm, instinctive sense of the word. She was organized, she was dependable, she showed up. Zoe had a stable home, a good school, a doctor she had been seeing since birth. Constance read to her every night, even when she was exhausted, even when her brain was still running through testimony from the afternoon. What she struggled to give Zoe was ease. The kind of mother who sits on the kitchen floor and makes a mess with play duff. The kind who laughs loudly at nothing. That version of herself had never fully developed, and she was not sure she knew how to find it. It was a wet Tuesday in late November when everything changed. That particular detail mattered to Constance later, because she was a person who noticed dates, who kept careful track of when things happened. November 19th, a Tuesday. Rain coming sideways off Lake Ontario and pooling at every intersection downtown. She had been in the middle of a sentencing hearing that had run 3 hours over schedule. A difficult case. A man convicted of a white-collar fraud that had destroyed the retirement savings of dozens of elderly people in Barrie. She had spent weeks writing the decision. When the hearing finally ended and the courtroom cleared, it was past 7 in the evening and her assistant had long since gone home. Constance gathered her files, put on her coat, and took the elevator down from the 14th floor to the building's main lobby. She almost didn't notice him. He was standing just inside the lobby door, dripping wet, holding a thermal delivery bag in both arms, and looking at the directory board on the wall with visible confusion. He was perhaps 35, wearing a rain jacket that was doing very little against the weather, with the kind of tired in his face that was not just the tiredness of one long day, but of many long days, stacked on top of each other with not enough sleep in between. The Collar Law Firm, he said, not really to her, mostly to himself. 14th floor it says, but there's no Collar on this board. Collar moved out in September, Constance said. They're at Bay and Adelaide now. He closed his eyes for a moment, just a brief second, but she caught it, that flicker of something a person tries not to show in public. Then he straightened up. Right. Thanks. She would have walked past him and into the rain and thought nothing more of it. But as she pushed through the glass door, the strap on the thermal bag broke cleanly. An old bag, worn down, probably not the first time, and the contents spilled across the marble floor of the lobby. Several containers, a paper bag, a small sealed cup of soup. One container cracked open and left a streak of what appeared to be rice and chicken across the tile. Constance stopped. She did not have to stop. She was a judge with a cold tea waiting for her at home, and a stack of files for tomorrow's hearing. She had no particular obligation to this man or his delivery, but she stopped. She bent down and helped gather the containers. He crouched beside her immediately, mortified, saying he was sorry, that she did not have to do that, that he would handle it. She handed him what she had picked up without comment. As she did, she noticed a photograph tucked into the front pocket of his jacket. Slightly crumpled, the edges worn soft in the way of a photograph that gets looked at often. It showed a boy of maybe 5 or 6, grinning with a gap where his 2 front teeth should have been, holding up a fish on a line with the pure unguarded pride of a small person who has just accomplished something enormous. Something tightened in Constance's chest. "Your son?" she asked. She didn't know why she asked it. She was not usually someone who asked. He looked up. The exhaustion in his face shifted very slightly into something else. Something warmer and more complicated. "Yeah. That's Matteo. He's 6. He looks proud of that fish. First one he ever caught. Last summer, at my uncle's place in Muskoka." He paused. "He talks about it like he caught a whale." Constance almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. She stood, straightened her coat. The man gathered the remaining food as best he could into the damaged bag. His hands were shaking slightly, from the cold, she assumed, or from frustration or both. "How many more deliveries tonight?" she asked. He glanced at his phone. 3. Maybe 4 if the next batch is ready when I get back to the restaurant. It was past 7 on a November night in Toronto and the rain was getting worse. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "There's a supply closet at the end of this hall. The building staff keep bags in there. I'll ask the security desk." She did not wait for him to respond. She walked to the security desk, spoke briefly with the guard, and came back with a large plastic bag from the building's maintenance supply. She handed it to him. He stared at it for a second. "Thank you," he said. And there was something in his voice that suggested he was not only thanking her for the bag. Constance nodded once, pulled up her collar against the rain, and left. She thought about the photograph the entire drive home. It was not a complicated photograph, but it had done something to her that she could not immediately name. There was a feeling it had stirred. Something old and located somewhere behind her sternum. And she spent the drive along the Gardiner trying to identify what it was. By the time she got home and found Zoe already asleep, the babysitter bundled into a cab, Constance stood in the doorway of her daughter's room for a long time watching her breathe. Zoe slept with her arm thrown over her stuffed rabbit the way she always did. One sock on, one sock off, the way she always did. 7 years old, and already a person with habits, with preferences, with a specific and irreplaceable way of being in the world. Constance sat on the edge of the bed very quietly and stayed there for a while, which was not something she usually did. The next morning, she asked her clerk to look into something. She felt faintly foolish doing it. It was not in her nature to pursue strangers. But she described the man from the lobby, and asked if anyone knew which restaurant service operated in the building area. Her clerk was resourceful. By afternoon she had a name. Adrian Reyes. 34 years old. Originally from Hamilton, single father. His wife, Paloma, had died 2 years earlier from a brain aneurysm. No warning, no time. She had been 31, Matteo had been 4. Adrian had sold their car, moved from their rented house in the West End to a smaller apartment in Etobicoke, and had been working delivery shifts. Sometimes 2 in a day ever since. He had no family in Toronto. His mother was still in Hamilton, too unwell to travel. He had a neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Fair, who watched Matteo on the evenings he worked, and he paid her what he could, which was less than what she deserved, and she had never once complained. Constance read the information her clerk had assembled and sat with it, for a long time without speaking. She had sent people to prison. She had ended careers, dissolved families on paper, enforced consequences that changed the course of lives. She was not unfamiliar with human suffering in its many forms. She processed it through law, through reason, through procedure. That was how she had always managed it. But Adrian Reyes was not a case file. She found herself thinking about the photograph. The gap-toothed boy with the fish. Matteo, who talked about his catch like he'd pulled up a whale. A child who had lost his mother at 4 years old, and whose father worked in the rain 4 nights a week, and had a broken delivery bag held together by habit and hope. She told herself she was just going to check on the situation. She had contacts at several community organizations, legal aid societies, family support networks. She could quietly point some resources in his direction. That was all. But when she found herself, on a cold Saturday afternoon, walking into the children's section of the Etobicoke Library on a tip that Adrian brought Matteo there every Saturday morning, she knew that was not all. She arrived just as the storytime session was ending. She stood near the edge of the room and watched Adrian Reyes sit cross-legged on the floor, while Matteo climbed onto his lap, with a stack of picture books he intended to take home. Adrian did not have his phone out. He was not scrolling, not distracted, not staring past his son the way exhausted parents sometimes do when they briefly check out. He was fully there, examining each book cover Matteo held up with complete attention, saying things like, "Oh, this one, do you remember what happens at the end?" and listening to the answer like it mattered more than anything else currently happening in the world. Constance felt something shift somewhere inside her. It was not dramatic, it was quiet and deep, the way a tectonic thing is quiet. You don't hear it, you just feel the ground change. She had not cried since her mother's funeral 14 years ago. She was not going to cry now in a public library. But something very close to the shape of tears was moving through her chest, looking for somewhere to go. Matteo looked up from his books and saw her. Children are not embarrassed by eye contact the way adults are. He looked at her with simple directness and said, "Hi," Constance said. Adrian turned. He recognized her immediately. She could see it in the way his expression reorganized itself. "You're the woman from the lobby," he said. "The night the bag broke?" "I am." There was a beat of silence that could have been awkward and almost wasn't. Matteo held up one of his books. "This one has a dog that can talk," he said, as if this were the most relevant piece of information available. Constance looked at the cover. "Is the dog trustworthy?" Matteo considered this very seriously. Mostly. Adrian looked between his son and this stranger in the library and seemed not to know what to make of any of it. Constance sat down on one of the small reading chairs nearby. Too small for her, slightly ridiculous, and asked Matteo to tell her about the book. He did. He was thorough and enthusiastic and slightly wrong about a few of the plot details, which did not dim his confidence at all. Adrian watched her with a kind of careful attention, like someone trying to work out whether something was real or a trick of the light. After some time, when Matteo had moved on to examining a book about deep-sea fish, Adrian said quietly, "Why are you here?" Constance considered several answers. She settled on the honest one. "I'm not entirely sure. I've been thinking about your son's photograph since Tuesday." He was quiet for a moment. "Most people don't notice me on deliveries." "I know," she said. "I didn't used to notice either." She did not explain what she meant by that. He did not ask. But something in the way he looked at her shifted. Like a door opening very slightly, just enough to let light through. Over the following weeks, Constance found small ways to help that did not announce themselves as charity, because she understood enough about dignity to know that charity announced loudly is not kindness, it is performance. She connected Adrian through a mutual contact to a legal aid clinic that helped him sort out a benefits issue he had been tangled in for months. She mentioned in conversation a community program at a nearby rec center that offered subsidized childcare on weekend evenings. She had seen the information in a case summary months ago and filed it somewhere she could not have anticipated needing. She did not say, "I researched your situation and I am now managing it." She said, "I came across this, I thought of you in case it's useful." He saw through it, she suspected. He was not naive, but he accepted the help with the same matter-of-fact grace with which he did everything. And he thanked her without making it into a bigger thing than it needed to be. That straightforwardness was something she had not encountered much in the world of law, where everything was weighted and strategic, and nothing was exactly what it appeared. She started meeting them at the library on Saturdays. It began as twice and then became routine, the way things become routine when nobody has formally agreed to them, but everyone keeps showing up. Matteo told her about his school, his best friend whose name was Oliver, a disagreement about a hockey card that had apparently been ongoing for 3 weeks. He asked her what she did for work, and when she said she was a judge, he was quiet for a moment and then said, very seriously, "Do you have a hammer?" She told him it was called a gavel, and he said he wanted to try one, and she said that was not possible, and he said, "Someday, though," with the confident optimism of someone who has not yet learned that some things simply do not happen. She started to look forward to Saturdays. In a way she had not looked forward to anything in a long time. And then Matteo got sick. It started as something that looked like a winter cold, fatigue, low fever, the ordinary misery of a child in a Canadian January. But it did not improve. After 2 weeks and a visit to the family doctor that escalated to a referral, that escalated to a pediatric specialist at Sick Kids. The word that came back was one that parents of young children hear in nightmares. Leukemia. Adrian called her from the hospital parking garage at 10 in the evening. He had not called her before. She was not sure he even had her number until she saw his name on her screen and understood that she had given it to him at some point, without realizing it was something she was doing. He didn't say much. He said Matteo's name and the diagnosis, and he said he didn't know who else to call. His voice was very steady, the way voices get when a person has decided that if they stop being steady everything will fall apart. Constance was in her car within 4 minutes. She did not stay long that night. There was not much to do except sit in the waiting room and be a body in a chair, so that he was not the only person in that room. She brought coffee from the hospital vending machine, which was terrible, and they both drank it anyway. After an hour or so he said he was okay, that she should go home. She left, but she drove home slowly, which was not like her. She did not sleep. In the weeks that followed, she moved carefully around the edges of what Adrian would accept. She did not take over. She did not arrive with solutions and a schedule. She understood, because she was a person who had spent her life managing her own grief quietly and alone, that there is a particular kind of help that feels like control, and it is not welcome even when well-intended. Instead, she was available. She picked Matteo up from the hospital and took him to appointments when Adrian's shifts could not be rearranged. She sat with him in the treatment room during one of his early sessions, while Adrian sorted out an insurance issue downstairs, and Matteo held her hand during the part that hurt and did not say anything, and neither did she. And somehow that was exactly enough. She started talking to Adrian on the phone in the evenings. Not about the case, not about the logistics, about other things, about the city, about the oddness of certain laws, about a book Matteo had been reading before he got sick, that he insisted she also read so they could discuss it. She read it. It was about a boy who could talk to weather. She reported back to Matteo that she had found it extremely plausible, and he was delighted. She began to notice things about herself during those weeks. She noticed that she looked at the clock at 7:30 most evenings, because that was usually when Adrian called. She noticed that she had started keeping certain things in her mind to tell him. Small observations. A funny exchange with her clerk. Something Zoe had said that morning. She noticed that her cold tea problem had not improved but had shifted. Now it was because she was on the phone, rather than because she was alone with her case files. She noticed, most of all, that the box she had kept sealed for a very long time was no longer entirely sealed. It frightened her. She had not become the person she was by opening boxes. One evening, Matteo was having a difficult night after a treatment session, and Constance had come to sit with him, while Adrian stepped out for air. Matteo lay with his head turned toward her, eyes half open, the way children look when they are too tired to sleep. There was a sketchbook on the bed beside him. He had taken to drawing during his hospital stays, filling pages with careful, deliberate pictures that had the specificity of a child who noticed things. He showed her one. A drawing of a courtroom, not entirely accurate in its architecture but recognizable. A raised bench, a chair, a figure sitting very straight and tall behind it. The figure had shoulder-length hair and a very serious expression. "Is that supposed to be me?" Constance asked. "Yeah," he said. "But I drew you smiling." She looked more closely. He had, in fact, given the figure a small careful smile. She was fairly certain she did not usually look like that in a courtroom.
"Why?" she asked.
He shrugged, the very small shrug of someone who considers the answer obvious. "Because that's what you look like when you think nobody's watching." Constance looked at that drawing for a long time. She became aware that her eyes were doing something they had not done in 14 years. She did not try to stop it. Matteo reached over and patted her hand once, in the businesslike way of a child offering comfort to an adult who has clearly reached some kind of limit. "It's okay," he said. "Dad cries in the car. He thinks I don't know." She did not speak for a moment. "We all have places we go," she finally said. "Yeah," said Matteo, "but you don't have to go somewhere else. You can just be here." Constance Mercer, who had held herself at careful arm's length from her own life for nearly 2 decades, who had turned her grief and her longing and her loneliness into a kind of precision instrument for justice, who had not let anyone close enough to see the inside of anything, sat in a hospital room in Toronto on a January night, and let herself be exactly where she was. When Adrian came back, she was still sitting there. He looked at her face and said nothing. He sat down in the chair on the other side of Matteo's bed. After a moment, he reached across his sleeping son and took her hand, not with any grand intention. Just the way you reach for something solid when the ground is uncertain. She let him. Matteo responded well to treatment. The months that followed were not easy. They were marked by the particular rhythm of pediatric oncology, which is hope and setback and incremental good news, and waiting, always waiting. But the numbers moved in the right direction, cautiously, and then with more confidence. And by late spring the team at Sick Kids was using words like responding and encouraging and eventually. On the morning those words were spoken, Constance was sitting in the hallway outside the consultation room. When Adrian came out, he did not say anything immediately. He sat down beside her and put his head in his hands and breathed for a moment. Then he looked up. His eyes were wet. He looked, she thought, like a man who had just been told he could put something down that he had been carrying for a very long time. "Remission," he said. "I heard," she said. They sat there in the hospital corridor and did not say anything else for a while, and that was all right. The following month, Constance announced the establishment of the Paloma Reyes Fund. named for Adrian's wife, with his blessing. Through a partnership with 3 Toronto area legal organizations. Its purpose was to provide emergency support to single parents navigating critical illness of a child. Navigating insurance systems, accessing community resources, ensuring that the paperwork and bureaucracy of crisis did not compound the crisis itself. She was not in charge of it. She was a founding board member. She asked Adrian to be involved in shaping it, not in a symbolic way, but in a real one. Because he knew firsthand what the gaps were, where the system failed the people it was supposed to reach. Investors in her professional circle raised eyebrows. A sitting judge, attaching her name to a charitable initiative, publicly associating herself with a man who had been a delivery driver. People had opinions. Constance acknowledged the opinions and moved on. At Zoe's school, there was a spring fair in late May. It was the kind of event Constance had attended every year, punctually and alone, in the manner of someone fulfilling a scheduled obligation. That year, she arrived with Adrian and Mateo, who promptly disappeared with Zoe toward the game stalls, and came back 40 minutes later with matching plastic rings from a prize wheel, and the shared conviction that they had essentially won the entire fair. Constance stood watching them. These 2 children who had each lost something irreplaceable, who had each found their footing anyway, and felt something she could not have accurately named. Not happiness exactly. Something wider and less tidy than happiness. Something that included everything that had been hard and everything that had cost them, and was made partly of those things rather than in spite of them. Adrian stood beside her. "You're doing it again," said. "What?" "Smiling when you think nobody's watching." She looked at him. Then she did not stop smiling. Mateo would later tell anyone who asked that the best part of that spring was the fish fry at Adrian's uncle's place in Muskoka, where he caught his second fish, which was bigger than the first, by what he described as a significant amount, and where Constance and Zoe both caught nothing and nobody let them forget it. He also said with the same straightforward certainty, with which he said most things, that Constance had taught him that serious people were not always as far away as they looked. That sometimes they were just waiting for someone to sit close enough to find out. There are people who move through the world very quietly and change it anyway. They do not arrive with ceremony. They arrive wet from the November rain with a broken bag, and a photograph of a child in their pocket, and they have no idea what they are carrying with them. And the people whose lives they change often have no idea, at the time, how close they came to not noticing. Constance Mercer did not stop being a judge. She did not stop being precise, demanding and formidable in the courtroom. But she stopped measuring the quality of her days by how much she had controlled, and started measuring them by something she had not had a word for in a very long time. She called it, simply this. As in, this morning, this dinner table, this child asking about a talking dog, this hand in mine, this. It turned out to be enough. More than enough. It turned out to be everything.